My fishing rod was still leaning against the back porch. My reading glasses, the ones I'd left on the kitchen windowsill for 15 years, were probably still there too. I didn't go back for them. I was 63 years old, standing in the parking lot of a Motel 6 off Route 9, holding a duffel bag I'd packed in 11 minutes. I remember counting. 11 minutes to pack up a life. My truck idled behind me. I didn't know what to do next, so I just stood there watching the vacancy sign flicker in the late afternoon light. Her name was Joanne. We'd been married 22 years. Her son's name was Kyle, and Kyle had decided he needed the house. I want to be clear about something before I go any further, because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking I must have done something wrong. That a woman doesn't just tell her husband of 22 years to leave unless there's a reason. I thought the same thing at first. I turned it over and over in my head those first few nights, lying on that motel mattress listening to the highway outside the window, trying to find what I'd missed, what I'd done. I hadn't done anything. Kyle was 31. He'd moved back home the previous October after his second business failed, something involving an online resale platform I never fully understood. He moved into the spare bedroom, which was fine. I didn't say a word. He was a son. I'd known him since he was 9 years old. I'd driven him to baseball practice. I'd sat in the stands when it rained. But Kyle had a way of expanding to fill whatever space he was given. By December, he was eating dinner with us every night and barely speaking to me. By February, he'd started having his friends over on weekends. By March, he was telling Joanne that he felt uncomfortable in the house, that my presence made things tense. I asked Joanne what that meant. She said she didn't know, but could I maybe try to be more welcoming? I was welcoming. I was the one who fixed the furnace that winter. I was the one who shoveled the driveway at 6 in the morning before either of them woke up. By April, Joanne sat me down at the kitchen table and told me that Kyle needed space to heal, that he was going through a hard time, that she thought it would be best if I stayed somewhere else for a little while, just until he got back on his feet. Just a little while. I was 63 years old. I'd owned that house jointly with her since 2009. My name was on the deed. I had a wood shop in the garage. I had a vegetable garden in the back that I'd been tending for 11 years. I left anyway. I don't fully know why, even now. Part of it was shock. Part of it was that I'd spent my whole adult life being the kind of man who doesn't make scenes. My father was that way. His father before him. You handle things quietly. You give people the benefit of the doubt. You trust that reasonable people will come to their senses. And part of it, the part I'm most ashamed of, was that I still loved her. And I thought if I gave her what she was asking for, she'd realize what she was throwing away. I took the duffel bag. I left the fishing rod. I drove to the Motel 6. The first week was the strangest week of my life. I'd worked in commercial HVAC for 38 years. I was semi-retired by then, doing a few consulting jobs here and there. I had a routine. I had a workshop. I had a small vegetable patch with 2 rows of tomatoes coming in and 1 row of pole beans I'd been looking forward to all winter. At the motel, I had a coffee maker that took those little pods and the television that picked up 40 channels, most of them shopping networks. I called Joanne on the 3rd day. She said Kyle was doing better, that she thought another week or 2 would do it. On day 5, I called my bank. This is the part where I made a decision I should have made on day 1, and I want to be honest about that. I should have walked into the bank the morning after she asked me to leave. Instead, it took me 5 days of shock and motel coffee and bad sleep to get there. I spoke to someone I'd known for years at the branch. He'd helped us refinance back in 2014. I told him the situation plainly. He didn't say much, just pulled up the account. The joint checking account Joanne and I had shared for 2 decades showed a withdrawal from 2 days prior. $4,800. A number that didn't match any bill we had. I thanked him, walked to my truck, sat there for about 10 minutes. Then I called an attorney. Her name was Ms. Fitch. She had an office on the second floor of a brick building downtown, and she'd been doing family law for 27 years. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She told me that because my name was on the deed to the house, I had legal rights that hadn't gone anywhere just because I'd voluntarily left. She told me to document everything. She told me not to move another dollar without involving her. She also told me something I've thought about many times since. The fact that you left quietly doesn't mean you gave anything up. It just means you were decent. Don't let them mistake your decency for weakness. I drove back to the motel. I ordered a pizza. I watched the news, and I made myself a promise that whatever happened next, I was going to handle it with a clear head and not a single decision made out of hurt. Over the next few months, I found a rental, a small one-bedroom apartment on the east side of town, second floor, window that looked out over a parking lot. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I kept consulting. Picked up 2 new clients, actually, because I had more time now. I'd been putting off reaching out to a commercial property management company for over a year because Joanne always wanted me home for dinner. Now I had no such constraint. They hired me for a seasonal contract that paid better than anything I'd done in 5 years. I started walking in the mornings, 3 miles, sometimes 4. I hadn't done that in years. I called my brother in Knoxville every Sunday. He didn't push me to talk about things I wasn't ready to talk about. He'd just update me on what was happening down there, his grandkids, his garden, whether the Vols had any shot that season. It was exactly what I needed. I didn't call Joanne. She called me twice in those first 2 months. Once to tell me the water heater was making a noise and to ask if I knew what it might be. I told her to call a plumber. The second time she called, Kyle answered my phone by accident. He'd apparently borrowed hers and hung up immediately. I noted both of these in the journal I'd started keeping at Ms. Fitch's suggestion. About 8 months in, the papers came through. Ms. Jastion. Fitch had initiated proceedings on my behalf, and the discovery process revealed things that took time for me to process. Kyle had never been trying to recover from a failed business. He'd been running up debts. He'd convinced Joanne to put his name on a credit line secured against the house, a line I'd had no knowledge of. The balance on it was significant. I sat across from Ms. Fitch in her office and read through the documentation. There was a long window behind her desk that looked out over the street. I watched a delivery driver unload boxes onto a dolly for a minute while I let it all settle. How did she think this was going to work? I asked. Not angry. Genuinely curious. Ms. Fitch folded her hands on the desk. People in these situations usually aren't thinking long-term, she said. The short-term feels urgent enough that the future doesn't seem real yet. The settlement took another several months, because my name was on the deed, and I had documented proof of my contributions to the property over 22 years, mortgage payments, renovation receipts, maintenance records. I was on solid ground. The house had to be sold. My portion of the equity came to me. It was less than it should have been given the credit line, but Ms. Fitch made sure it was fair. I bought a small house on the other side of town, ranch style, single floor, a half-acre lot, good soil in the backyard. The first thing I did after closing was drive to the garden center and buy tomato starts. I want to tell you about the day I found out. I'd been in my new house about 8 months when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. It was Joanne. She'd gotten my new number from someone, not sure who. She sounded different. Smaller somehow. The confidence that used to sit right at the surface of everything she said was gone. She said she was sorry to bother me, said she'd seen something online. Apparently I'd been mentioned in an industry newsletter, something about a consulting contract I'd wrapped up with a regional hospital system, the biggest job of my career. She'd read my name and looked me up. There was a pause. You seem like you're doing well, she said. I am, I said. Another pause. Kyle is. It's been hard, she said. The house sold. I'm renting a place. He's been having some troubles. I didn't ask what kind of troubles. I had a reasonable guess. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. And I meant it. Not for her sake, not then, but because I'd known Kyle since he was 9 years old, And whatever he'd become, there was still a part of me that remembered the kid who used to fall asleep in the back seat on the drive home from those baseball games. I wanted to say, she started, and then stopped. I could hear her breathing. "You don't have to," I said. "I think I do," she said. "I think we made a mistake." I looked out the window at the backyard. The tomatoes were coming in thick that year. I'd staked them properly this time, taken more care with the spacing. "I appreciate you saying that," I told her. "I do, but I think we're both where we need to be now." She didn't say anything for a moment. "Are you happy?" she asked. It was an honest question. I gave it an honest answer. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." We said goodbye the way people do when they both know they won't be talking again. Civil. Final. I stood in the kitchen for a minute after I hung up. Then I put the phone in my pocket, went out back, checked the steaks on the tomatoes, and came back in and made dinner. I've had some time now to think about what those 2 years taught me. The obvious lesson, the one people always want to hear, is something about strength, about standing back up, about proving something to the person who doubted you. I understand why that's satisfying, and I won't pretend there wasn't some part of me that felt it, reading my name in that newsletter and knowing she'd seen it too. But that's not the part that stayed with me. What stayed with me is something my father used to say when I was a boy, whenever something went wrong on the farm, whenever the weather didn't cooperate or a piece of machinery broke down at the worst possible time. He'd stand there for a minute, looking at whatever the problem was, and then he'd say, "Well, what can we do with what we've got? Not what should have happened. Not who's to blame. Just what can we do with what we've got?" I was 63 years old, standing in a Motel 6 parking lot with an 11-minute duffel bag. I'm 66 now. I have a house I own free and clear. I have a half-acre with good soil. I have a consulting practice that's the best it's ever been. I have my brother's phone number in my pocket and a standing Sunday call. I have tomatoes coming in thick every summer. My fishing rod is gone. I bought a new one, a better one actually. I drove up to a lake in the northern part of the state last September with my brother and his oldest grandson, who's 11 and has apparently inherited the family patience for sitting quietly and waiting for something to happen. We caught 4 fish between the 3 of us. The boy wanted to know if we could do it again next year. I said absolutely. That's the part that stays with me. Not the phone call, not the newsletter, not the settlement or the paperwork or any of it. Just the boy asking if we could come back next year. And the answer being yes. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in those 3 years. Not the legal part, not the financial part. Though both of those matter and I won't pretend otherwise. I mean the part underneath all of it. The part that explains how a man can pack up 22 years of his life in 11 minutes and come out the other side with more than he started with. Here's what I've come to believe. The way you respond to being wronged tells you everything about who you actually are. Not who you think you are, not who you were raised to be, who you are when the ground disappears under your feet, and there's nothing left to stand on but yourself. Joanne made a choice. Kyle made a series of choices, and every single one of those choices had a consequence that was already built into it, whether any of them saw it coming or not. That's not punishment. That's just how things work. When you treat a person's decency as a weakness, you will eventually discover that you were wrong. When you mistake someone's silence for surrender, life has a way of correcting that misunderstanding. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in the movies. Just quietly, over time, the truth settles. I spent 5 days paralyzed in a motel before I walked into a bank. I wish I'd done it on day 1. That's my honest regret, and I'll own it. But when I finally did, when I called Ms. Fitch, when I started writing things down, when I stopped waiting for Joanne to come to her senses and started taking responsibility for my own situation, that's when things changed. Not because the universe rewarded me for suffering, but because I finally stopped being passive about my own life. That's the part I want anyone going through something like this to hear. You cannot control what other people do. You cannot force anyone to see what they're throwing away, but you can decide at any moment to stop waiting for permission to reclaim what's yours, your finances, your legal rights, your sense of self, your morning walk, your tomato plants, your Sunday phone calls with your brother. Nobody is going to hand those back to you. You have to go get them. Integrity is a slow investment. You spend years being the man who shovels the driveway before anyone else wakes up, who fixes the furnace without being asked, who leaves without making a scene because you believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt. None of that looks impressive in the moment. Some people will read it as weakness, but what you're actually doing is building something, a version of yourself that can withstand loss without being destroyed by it. That's not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything. The boy asked if we could go fishing again next year, and I said yes without hesitating, because I have a life now that allows for yes. That didn't happen by accident. It happened because at 63 years old, standing in a parking lot with an 11-minute bag, I eventually chose to stop being a passenger in my own story. That choice is available to anyone, at any age, in any parking lot.